Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show. Every week I talk with interesting CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies ranging from Netflix to Kinko's to YPO, EO, Activation, Blizzard, Lending Tree. Go check out our archives. Lots of great episodes for you there. I'm also the co-founder of Rise 25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. And in today's guest, it was actually introduced to me by a couple of different past guests. So Michael Arrieta of Garden City Companies, go check out joingardencity.com. He introduced me to today's guest, and also Nathaniel Broughton, who was another past guest of mine who also had connections to our guest. So Brent Beshore is his name. He's the founder and CEO of Permanent Equity, which is a really interesting company because they actually acquire family companies and they want to hold them for the long term, which, you know, I live here in Silicon Valley or near Silicon Valley in the Bay Area, where it's really this mentality of buy, grow, sell. And so it's really goes against the grain. So I thought it'd be really interesting to talk to him about it. So Permanent Equity is the name of the company. They are based in Missouri. They have $350 million of long-term committed capital. And he also lives in Columbia, Missouri, with his wife and 3 daughters. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise 25 Media, where we help businesses in the B2B space to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you have any questions about it or you want to learn more, go to rise25media.com or email us at support@rise25media.com. All right, Brent, such a pleasure to have you on here. And, looking at your background here, and it's such a normal path and traditional trajectory, right? You go and get your degree in politics and poverty studies, and then you go run a private equity firm, of course, right? Like cliched, right? No, I'm joking, of course, but you kind of have a little bit of winding path, I guess we could say. So you, like I, went to law school, but smart guy, you're like, forget this. You're getting your JD MBA. You're like, I've seen enough. I'm going to go start a company. So take me back to that moment in time where you make this really dramatic life decision to drop out of this program that you're 3 years into to start a company.
Yeah, well, John, thanks so much for having me on. And I often joke that I'm the Forrest Gump of private equity. So yes, to say it was a winding, long journey has been an understatement. I was getting my law degree, my MBA, and I had too much to drink one night, to be honest, and agreed to help start a business. And that set me down a path to start another business. And then as close to accidentally as you possibly can, I accidentally bought a business and did well with it.
How do you accidentally buy a business? How does that happen?
That's a great question. I still ask myself to some degree that today. I had a mutual friend who said, hey, you should meet this guy. He's been left at the altar for the second time. And I took that to mean I tried to buy his business, because why else would you tell me he'd been left at the altar for the second time? And
he'd been literally left at the altar, like getting married, or in a business context?
In a business context. He tried to sell the business twice, and he'd been figuratively left at the altar.
Okay.
It gotten close to closing twice and couldn't get the deal across the finish line. And so anyway, I met the guy, and I don't know, I look about 25 now. I looked about 14 then, and told the guy I wanted to try to buy his business, and he laughed at me, which is an appropriate response. I probably would have laughed at me too. And he said, have you ever bought anything before? And I said, no, sir. And he goes, would you know how you're going to come up with the money? And I was like, I think the SBA. Anyway,
the conviction.
It was one of those things. I was a hot mess. I still am. But so anyway, so we talked about the business. We talked about pricing, and we're pretty far apart. And so he said, hey, no, thank you. This isn't going to work out. And I said, no problem. And for 7 months, I didn't hear from him. Went along, operating the business. I was a entrepreneur operator of, some marketing companies. And then out of the blue, I remember I got a call one day, and he said, hey, I'm exhausted. The business is in great shape. We just renewed our largest account. Like, I want out. So I'll give it to you for the price you asked for, but you got to close all cash 60 days from now. And so I said yes. And it was kind of one of those moments where the big client says yes and you get in the elevator and then say, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Very much that feeling, and had to call in every favor and work my tail off and had the team, work our tails off to close it. And so closed it with an SBA loan and did well with the business. And it really opened up my eyes to this whole world of people like him who operate and their entire net worth is tied up in these family companies. And when they go to retire, what happens? And there really wasn't a clear answer then. And it's certainly become a hotter space now, but it's still pretty much the wild, wild west. There's a lot of games, let's put it that way, that get played in that area. And so it's really hard. Most businesses that size are really non-transferable. We call it owner moat. And all the value of the business is tied up in the relationships, the skill set of the owner. And so anyway, that was my first foray. And honestly, I've always been a fan of do more of what works and less of what doesn't. And it worked. And so I wondered, how many other people were out there in a similar position and could we serve them well? And that's been my career.
So this first company, that was the MediaCross business.
Yep.
It was a military recruitment firm. You partnered with the military and you did recruiting for the military. Had you been in the military at this point?
I had not.
Had you done recruiting at this point?
I had not.
And you hadn't bought a business. All right. So then
I had not.
What gave you the conviction that you'd be able to pull this off? I mean, if it was me, I'd be scared witless that what happens if I drive this thing into the ground? How do I know I can do this thing? How do I know that I want to do this thing?
Yeah, I mean, I've always had a really rare, special combination of arrogance and incompetence that's really led my career. And so, no, I mean, I honestly, I had all those convictions. I got to say, I mean, the way we structured the deal and the way that the contracts worked, there was a way for me to lose some money, but pretty much if I could keep it on the rails, I felt pretty confident that we could do the work. And it's a recruitment business, but it was recruitment marketing for the most part. And so I was in a marketing-based business already. It was not the same, but it was similar enough. It kind of rhymed. And so, but honestly, I mean, I was getting married around that time, and I told my wife asked me, she goes, "So what happens if this doesn't work out?" And I was like, "Well, let's not think about that because that'd be bad." And I mean, the honest to God truth is that I would have declared bankruptcy. So,
worst that can happen, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, and it would have been bad, and my career would have been totally different. And yeah, I mean, look, anybody who comes on your show and doesn't attribute any success they've had to a significant dose of luck is probably lying.
And talk to me about the seller. Did the seller stick around and for a while and help you figure out how to run the business?
Yeah, so he stuck around for a while. He really was excited about being a painter. He wanted to be a professional artist. And so that was his plan is I want to sell this. I want to be a professional artist. And he still is a professional artist today and is doing well from what I can tell.
And what did you learn about acquiring businesses from that experience that taught you how to acquire a business that is one that you can continue to run, that isn't completely revolving around the owner and that can continue on beyond the owner?
Yeah, well, how did I learn? I think you just learn by screwing up and Google. I mean, to be honest, I remember, especially early on, I still do this maybe to some degree today, but early on, I'd be on calls with lawyers or accountants or whatever in due diligence on the deal, and they'd throw something out there, and I would just be furiously Googling what the term was to try to figure out if I could hang. And so, you just pick up things along the way. I would say, what we figured out early on was most businesses that are small. And so we should probably define small business, right? Because I mean, it depends on which perch you're sitting from. Some small businesses are like the local bagel shop, right? And some people consider, 1,000-person company a small business, right? Comparatively. When I say small business, I kind of mean businesses that are, it's not just a job, right? So there's a legitimate company there. The owner may work in the business and often does, but the business is bigger than just them. And so these businesses, typically on the lower end are going to be kind of starting around $250,000, $350,000 a year free cash flow. And today we buy businesses quite a bit larger than that. So we're buying businesses between 3 and 8 million, kind of 3 and 10 million in free cash flow. So that's profit, right? Not just revenue. And so, when I think of, on the smaller end of that, those are, people call those like micro businesses or, people who operate in that area, kind of micro private equity. And so, we learned that we like businesses that have a little more heft to them. We like businesses that are a little more advanced, that have, created something or do something for their customers that's differentiated, and that they have a little niche that they can defend in the marketplace for whatever reason. And so it's often difficult, though, until you look at the business to figure out if that's the case or not. And we're always trying to, when we see the deals, we're always trying to figure out, okay, what's the thing that makes them special, that makes them durable, that would allow us to transition them. And it certainly can't all be tied up in the goodwill of the owner. Give us some examples of the types of businesses that you've acquired. Yeah, so we own a portfolio of 11 companies today that are really pretty diversified in terms of sector. We own aerospace, a couple of businesses in the aerospace. We own the nation's largest swimming pool builder. We own a couple manufacturers in the kind of backyard space. We own a couple construction firms otherwise. And then we actually own the highest end matchmaking firm in the world called Selective Search. It's a fascinating business. I was not at all familiar when we first got to know it. And what a wonderful thing they do to pair people up who are looking for love and long-term committed monogamous relationships. It's not a dating service. It's a very high-end matchmaking service. So very diversified, really across the country. We've got offices coast to coast. So it's fun. Give me an example from any of the acquisitions you've done so far of a big challenge that you uncovered after acquisition that you didn't expect, and how you overcame it. Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So I would say no acquisition goes how you think it will. That's one of the things that figured out over the years. I mean, we've lost the dominant major customer right after closing. We've had major issues with leadership teams. We've had issues with, everything from addiction issues to, people having, health issues for them, for their families, for their children. It's been tough. Especially, COVID. Obviously we battled that hard across the portfolio. It's really every company. I've joked this before. There's a loosely functioning disaster that happens to make money. And so, when you look at these companies, we buy them at a price and we assume that there's going to be a lot that's already going wrong, and there's going to be probably more that goes wrong. A sale process is a very disruptive time. There's a lot of, distrust that's naturally built into the process. And by the way, for very good reason. There are horror stories after horror stories of acquirers acquiring a business and butchering it afterwards, and, downsizing and firing people, cutting benefits, all that stuff. So you hear stories about company acquisitions. I don't know if this applies to the PE space. Maybe it's more a company acquiring another company, but a lot of times those acquisitions don't go well. I've heard statistics like 80% of the time it's like a failed acquisition. Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. It is brutally difficult to create effective change. And these organizations have such momentum, and they're fragile a lot of times. And so, that's one of the things that we really work hard to do, is to try to establish trust, treat people super well, try to treat people like how we want to be treated ourselves. Like we always think about it, if we were them, what would we want? How would we want to be communicated with? How do we want to be treated? And so we try to go down that route, which at least so far has turned out pretty well, despite the bumps. Right. Now, it's interesting. I've interviewed a number of like VCs, venture capitalists, other types of investors. And a lot of times when you ask them what they look for in a company, they will focus on the founder. They'll say, I'm looking for, amazing founder. And it's almost like you're looking at the opposite. You don't want a dynamic founder. It's what's more important is looking at the rest of the team. Yeah. We do. So like anything else, a dynamic founder can be fantastic if they're going to stick around, or terrible if they're not. So we always look at replaceability. And there's some people we've met that are absolutely like generational talent, like unbelievably talented. And how do you replace them? You can't. And so how much of the business is tied to them is the question. And that ends up becoming a major source of due diligence for us is, what does it look like to replace them? Our favorite are founders that are dynamic and fantastic, but have taken significant steps out of the business and are not working very many hours in the business, and maybe just kind of sprinkling their expertise on it, depending on what their goals are. I mean, we do both, 100% acquisitions where the seller and the CEO walks out, 2 weeks in, or even on closing day, and we have to replace them as CEO. And we've done deals where we partner with people for a very long time and they stick around, and we love working with them, right? And we help resource them and help take that company to the next level. So we can do both. It just depends on the situation, and we just try to be upfront and honest about what are we actually looking at, and kind of co-design the plan with the seller, so there's no surprises.
I want to ask you about how you make these acquisitions a win-win all around. Because, with your first company, it sounds like, you mentioned that the seller was left at the altar a couple of times. So he really wanted to sell. He came back to you, all that kind of stuff. And you ended up getting a good deal for that. But I know that can't be the sales pitch for every company, that we're going to get a great deal. And in some cases, you even hear that backfires, because then there's some resentment maybe built in. So how do you either structure these arrangements, these acquisitions, or how do you handle it so that it is a win-win, so that you get deal flow, you get businesses coming to you who want to sell to you, not thinking that they're going to have to sell for a song, but also so that you incentivize the sellers so that they're not resentful afterwards.
Yeah, well, so one thing that I would say is we've never bought something for a song. We've never, I would actually say, have gotten a great deal. Even MediaCross, I mean, we've paid a very fair multiple that was kind of in the ballpark of what others were willing to pay. Now, the prices look a lot lower because of how difficult the transition is and how fragile the businesses are. But from a ballpark standpoint, we're in the same ballpark as other people, and we try to not win on price, right? So we don't expect people to take a big discount to do business with us. We're not trying to get a great deal. As you said, it doesn't create a win-win relationship. And the way we think about that more broadly is, we not only want to create a win-win for us and for the seller, but we also want to create a win for the leadership team that we're going to work with, for the employee base that we're going to be responsible for the vendors, for the customers, for the local communities, and maybe even the regulators, depending on the industry. So we think about it as, everyone's sitting around the table and everyone's got slightly different interests. And, we know that if we serve all of those stakeholders well, that ultimately it'll create a very durable and sustainable company. Because if it's not a win-win for all those people, you're just going to have major problems. You're going to be just battling. And so we want to, we joke often that we want to buy boring businesses because all they do is make money and they get along, right? The companies that don't create sustainable win-wins don't just make money and don't just have a kind of nice, peaceful life. So, how do we do that? It depends on the situation. What we're trying to do is we're trying to pay fair value, and that's going to differ by industry. It's going to differ by the stability of the company, the nature of the revenue, customer concentration, how staffed the leadership team is, how much capacity do they have to grow. I mean, all those things, right? But we're trying to pay a fair price, and we're trying to really make our money not on the purchase per se, but on what we think we can do with the company over a long period of time and being a good steward with it. So, and obviously it just depends on the situation, how that's kind of effectuated.
Yeah. Now, you raise money from investors to invest in your private equity company. You then turn around and take that money, invest it in these businesses, and you require a 3-decade lock. So that means that they invest their money, they're not getting it back for 30 years. Is that right? How does that sales pitch work? How do you sell an investor on that idea?
Yeah, well, it's interesting that you say that, because we intentionally didn't try to sell any investor on it. What we said to them was, we think this is a feature, not a bug. And, it's intentional. The reason why we have that long dated capital is because it allows us to do something which almost no one else can do in our business, which is buy with no intention of selling the business. So if you think about how most people operate in the private equity world, it is buy something, lever it to the moon, put as much debt as you possibly can on it, strip it of cost structure, which is going to make the earnings of the business go up short term, right? And then try to sell it again to somebody else within a fairly short period of time. I mean, really the max hold period, maybe is 5-6 years at most. And oftentimes private equity firms are trying to turn assets within, 3 or 4 years. So if you think about that, every 3 to 4 years, you're going to have a new owner of the business that has new preferences. It's all new team, all new rules. It's highly disruptive, right? So for us, what we said was if I designed this again, all from first principles of what would I want if as an entrepreneur, or what would I want as an operator? And I certainly wouldn't want my ownership to change, to completely turn over every 3 to 4 years, and be forced to basically go through that sort of rat race over and over and over again. And so what it allows us to do is buy with no intention of selling the business. And there's a lot of investors that said that that's ridiculous and that we would never do that. And we found a great group of people who selected in and said, no, we get it. A lot of them were owners themselves of businesses and ran family-owned businesses.
So they understand the importance of a longer term timeline and why that's valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, they get it, and we talk about it often. I mean, one of the things we say often is that it's impossible to make good long-term decisions with short-term capital. And I think that's just obvious. If you run a business, if you're making decisions to optimize for the short term, there's absolutely no way that you can make investments that maybe not pay off for 5 or 10 years if your time horizon is shorter than that.
Yeah. I have to ask you about, and this is maybe more of an observation than it is a question, but so often when there's big money at stake, I'm talking about $300+ million fund here, people get very serious quickly, right? They're worried about letting their personality come out. And that's something that I kind of struggled with earlier in my career, and kind of struggled with the idea of like letting my sense of humor come out, and you were a very humble, kind of down to earth, very self-effacing guy. And yet you're running this very expensive firm, a lot of dollars at stake. How do you reconcile those two? And how do you, manage to be self-effacing while working in these worlds of private equity? The military is not really one that's known for embracing a crazy sense of humor. How do you reconcile those two and make it work?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, I think maybe I come across as temporarily more humble than I am. Once you get to know me, I've got plenty of pride issues. But I would just say, I mean, look, life's too short to be somebody you're not, and I want to enjoy what I do. And so one of the prerequisites for building the firm was just I want to work with people that I enjoy being around. And that includes investors, right? I mean, those are your partners in the business. And so we try to be ourselves. I mean, I laugh because during fundraising, I mean, we wore blue jeans and polos for the most part. Everyone else is dressed up in suits, and we were just us. And people would be shocked, right? We'd walk into some foundation or endowment, and they would say, thanks for dressing up today, guys, and say, hey, look, this is us, right? This is how we dress whenever we're working with sellers. We always want to be respectful. We're not trying to be disrespectful, but we want you to get to know us as us. And I think that, one of the things our investors appreciated was that, and we were told multiple times by them that we were the most transparent organization they've ever diligenced. I mean, I told all of our investors, like, you can talk to whoever you want on staff. You can ask them anything you want. You can have as much time as you want with them. I mean, really just get to know us and see if we're a good fit, because we are asking them to sign up for a very long time horizon and really a lack of control. And so if you're going to do that, I mean, I just don't know how else you do it.
Yeah. And, I think letting your personality shine through, one, I agree with you 100%. I think you should be authentic. You should be who you are, whether it's on a podcast, in a video, in a speech, or face-to-face. And I love that I asked Nathaniel to tell me some stories about you beforehand. And he told me about this time. I don't know if you can remember this, 10 years ago, you had to fly to New York to meet with some investors. It was snowing in St. Louis, also New York. Nathaniel almost missed the flight, and you somehow convinced the pilot, not the flight crew or the flight attendant, but the pilot, to hold the plane for him.
Yeah. I almost got arrested. That was an interesting trip. I got him to hold the plane, and then we flew to New York, and we were on final arrival, and the plane had to make an emergency maneuver and get out of there because the airplane, the landing got shut down. And so I think we were flown to Buffalo. We had to rent a car. I think it was in Buffalo. And we actually got into a car accident in Times Square around midnight. got a hit and run. The guy who hit us drove away, and anyway, it was a crazy trip. It was a really fun trip. It's one that I look back on fondly. Obviously,
it's funny when you have those stories back in the beginning days of your business that you can look back on fondly.
That's some stuff that still happens today. So I mean, we're no different.
Yeah, that's true. I also want to ask you about acquiring talent. You know, a lot of the talk in the media these days is about the shortage of labor, getting good people. You know, you do a lot of things deliberately with your fund to, you know, do things differently. Everyone's going this way, they're zigging, you're zagging. So talk a little bit about how that works for attracting, you know, talent to come work for you in Colombia. Well, you said you have other offices around the country, but at least initially in Columbia, Missouri, not a typical location of, you know, it's not Silicon Valley, right?
Yeah. Well, so I mean, so the core team at the permanent equity levels, all but one of us is in Columbia, and we love Columbia. It's a college town. You know, 40,000 students, about 115,000 people, 300,000-ish in the immediate area, but it's fantastic. We have great music, food, art, right in the middle of the country, so we can go to either coast fairly quickly. We really do. We appreciate it immensely. But most of the people that we're working with are not located here, right? So we've got, I think we're almost pushing 1,000 employees now across the country at the portfolio companies. And you know, one of the things that we think about when it comes to talent is what would we want if I was looking for an opportunity? Like I would want to be paid fairly. I'd want to have a lot of autonomy. I'd want to be in a great culture, and I'd want to have upward mobility, the ability to kind of grow as I can grow and add to my skill set. And so really that's what we tried to build, is just something that we'd want to work for ourselves, right? And that's really, I think, what we can offer, especially to executive level talent, is the ability to come in as called a chief operating officer, a CFO, then get a shot at running a company. And if you do well, then actually the ability to do one step further, which is to back hire the CEO and become a portfolio manager over a handful of companies that you end up becoming kind of the board of directors in the box for. And so, yeah, that's been a great program for us. We actually have something called the Orbit, which you go on our website. You can actually sign up for basically what job you want, and then when that job comes available, you get notified, and the companies that are hiring for that can connect with you. And so that's been really successful. In fact, we almost exclusively now hire out of the Orbit, and I don't know. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to connect people with great opportunities and to see them grow into those opportunities.
Brent, this has been such a pleasure talking to you. I love what you're doing. I love that you're helping, you know, small family-owned businesses to get to the next chapter. I want to ask you the gratitude question that I always ask, which is, we're a big fan of gratitudes over here. So if you look around at your peers and contemporaries, however you want to define that, who do you respect? Who do you admire that's doing good work?
Yeah. Well, so business partner now of mine, his name is Patrick O'Shaughnessy. He actually runs Invest Like the Best podcast. So I don't know if you've ever.
I'll have to go check it out. Yeah,
it's a great podcast. But he was the guy that out of the blue I met through Twitter. This is probably 6 or 7 years ago now. And he and I were connecting on something. It was a capital allocation, I think is the question he asked. And we got on the phone. And he was like, wait, what do you do? He had never heard of what I did. And he said, okay, that's fascinating. Can I come visit you? So we spent the day together. And at the end of that, he comes from a wealthy family in Connecticut. And he said, hey, my family wants to invest with you. I'm like, how do we do that? And I said, well, there's no opportunity. And he's like, no, for real. Like, we want to invest. And I said, no, for real. Like, there's no opportunity. We're not taking outside capital. And he said, so you would never take outside capital? I said, well, not in a traditional, 2 and 20 structure that, most people have to go into, and, limited time horizon, all the problems we talked about earlier. And he said, well, why don't you just design what you want? And I'll tell you if we can invest in it or not. And really, that was the impetus for us taking outside capital. I mean, without Patrick, we wouldn't have certainly had, the motivation to, or really the courage to probably do what we've done. And so designed it, back of a napkin and sent it to him. And he said, that looks great. We'll invest. And I said, okay, great. That's wonderful. But where does the rest of the money come from? Because we're just a bunch of people in Columbia, Missouri, operating out of a house. And he said, well, I've got friends, and let's go get this thing done. And He and his family were just, couldn't have been kinder. He's turned into a dear friend and now a business partner in a number of things. And so, Yeah, he knows I cares for him and personally and professionally. But I tell you what, so much gratitude that our paths crossed, and that he had the desire to come vacation, I think, in Missouri in February, which is not exactly a hotspot destination. So,
and such a classic case of just an opportunity presenting itself and taking advantage of it.
Yeah.
You didn't expect that maybe you would go that path, but that seemed like it was the right path for you.
No, I have no ties to finance. I've never taken a finance class in my life. I can barely open up Excel, and somehow I found myself running a private equity firm. So yeah, I guess everything's possible. Be careful what you wish for.
Exactly. Well, Brent, it's such a pleasure. Where can people go to learn more about you?
I would say the website, permanentequity.com. We've got a bunch of writings on there, hopefully a bunch of resources that can be helpful to people. And I don't know, Twitter's probably a good place. I'm just at Brent Beshore on Twitter. DMs are open, so feel free to reach out to me.
Excellent. Thanks, Brent.
Hey, thanks a lot, John.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
Revolution.
And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.